it's not wrong to think about uh, a movie like The Matrix to understand what Blake's getting at here. That people are in service to a kind of machine. People, the experience of actual subjects is getting sacrificed to the service of maintaining a kind of mechanical representation of reality. Um, and that, I think that's what Coates is talking about as well. He refers to the violent activities of police as moved by some unseen cosmic clock, has a kind of mechanical compulsion driving it. Um, that's in So all these cases maintaining this mechanical representation of reality demands disregarding the actual experience of certain bodies. Um, there's a sacrifice of bodies, of violence against bodies, actual subjective, embodied subjective experience um, uh, that's getting pointed out. Um, Another way in which Coates formulates this, it also reminds me of Blake in its kind of um, playfulness. Um, he talks about good intentions as a hall pass through history. Um, that's to say, this is very much like Blake too. Um, that having the supposed goodwill, assumption of goodwill, becomes a license for not paying attention to actual what's actually going on. So the good example of this is just the bad apples, account, the way in which violence against racial minorities, violence against women is systemic, um, but it is in reality systemic, um, but is socially represented only in terms of anomalies, individual, idiosyncratic, particular cases. Um, uh, so the assumption that good intentions are the rule, and the violence is the exception to the rule, is a way of a hall pass through history, a way of disregarding the reality of what's going on. Blake, in his poem "The Human Abstract," so that's another way of talking about this uh, mechanical servicing, this matrix-like mechanical reproduction of kind of objective, rational picture of reality. Blake calls that the human abstract. Again, a kind of double entendre. Uh, the abstract, the schema, the model of the human, but also the human abstracted, the human turned into an abstraction. That's what he's saying is happening. Has happened to us in the modern world. That's what McGilchrist is suggesting. Has become only more pronounced with time and the development of technology. But Blake makes the same kind of critique of good intentions, um, criticizing uh, piety, the Christian piety, bourgeois compassion for the poor. Um, he satirizes it in this poem titled "The Human Abstract." Pity would be no more if we did not make somebody poor. Mercy no more could be if all were as happy as we. So again, he's taking these social virtues, pity, mercy, compassion. These are good qualities that on the individual level, these are virtues that are important to have, that we celebrate in modern society. But Blake is saying, well, wait a second. On a systemic level, if we looking at the big picture, if everybody was happy, if nobody was poor, then we couldn't be have pity. We couldn't have compassion. So we need people to be poor. We need people to suffer in order to keep celebrating ourselves for feeling sorry for them. So he's looking at this larger picture in the way in which we depend on or systemically reproduce a certain social reality in order to uh, maintain a certain conception of ourselves, a certain perspective. And that's what these, in a way, these metaphors, that is to say, pity becomes a metaphor for this disguised social reality. And that's the dream that Coates is talking about. This dream of purity and justice. It disguises actual violence. Um, it's the blanket in which that key metaphor that Coates uses, um, the blanket in which his body is wrapped. Um, this dream of uh, of, of innocence and justice. So I hope you have a sense when you look at those Blake poems, think about what he's trying to do in those poems. That he's giving us a new experience of embodiment. It's something he's making us newly alive, waking us up to an awareness of bodies that we didn't have before. So that's a point I want to make about Coates. The key point. Racism is a visceral experience. Um, it's an embodied experience. Uh, it's not an abstract experience. Um, uh, I want that to be troubling and surprising in a surprising way. That's to say, it's not what you think. He's not referring to what you think viscera or visceral means. He wants to wake you up to a new idea of of embodiment. Um, that's why I think Coates does a lot of work with metaphors in the piece. There's a lot of poetry, a lot of stylized rhetoric that he's using to evoke bodies, embodied experience very vividly, violence against bodies. Um, so he's like Blake, he's showing how social ideology, the ideology of abstraction, the white supremacy, the normalization of the male, straight white male gaze, um, and making other marginalizing of the racialized body, female body. Um, Coates likewise wants us to think about how racism creates certain kind of bodies, creates viscera, that it creates the violation, the fear of the vulnerability of bodies in certain very specific ways. So this recalls a really powerful essay by Charles Johnson called The Phenomenology of the Black Body. Um, and I've put a link to that on the discussion page. Um, if you care to look at it, it's not required, but it's a very, very powerful memoir, a personal piece of personal nonfiction prose about the experience of his own body, how racism creates it, a, a, experience of embodiment, his own experience of embodiment, feeling his own body as a social product. This goes back to W.E.B. Du Bois' idea of black double consciousness, that to be black is to always see oneself through white eyes. In a phenomenology of the black body, Charles Johnson refers to seeing himself through the white gaze. The black body becomes a repository for the off scum of racial relations. To black subjectivity is attributed the contents that white consciousness itself fears to contain or confront. The otherness, again, that Blake associates with the fly and the tiger, a stain. The idea is extended to include black blood, which carries the germ of the underworld and the traits of lower orders of animals. One drop of black blood, for example, will cause a white family to revert to negroid characteristics. So again, this contrast between the normalized white gaze, the disembodied human abstract that has the privileged prerogative to see the world from a disembodied perspective, and the stain, the contamination of embodiedness that attaches to blackness, implicitly unacknowledged. The essay proceeds to describe how Johnson himself experiences this. In a particular example, it's really powerful. Talks about walking into a bar and ruminating about academic topics, Boolean expansions. I turned thirsty into a bar, dimly lit room, obscured by shadows, occupied by whites. Goodbye, Boolean expansions. I am seen, but as a black, seen as a stained body, as physicality, basically opaque to others, a possibility, of course, that whites themselves have in a room of blacks. Their look, an intending beam focused my way, suddenly realizes something larval in me, in the powerful animal metaphors. My world is epidermalized, collapsed like a house of cards into the stained casement of my skin. So recognize how much work these metaphors, casement, epidermalized, are doing to make the reader imagine something more than can be objectively represented. He's tearing the body apart in a way to evoke this visceral experience of racism in new unfamiliar terms. My subjectivity is turned inside out like a shirt cuff. And so it's not I who am making a meaning for myself, but it's the meaning that was already there, pre existing, waiting for me, much like a mugger. Again, the metaphor. All I am can be and can be to them is as nakedly presented as the genitals of a plant, since they cannot see my other profiles. Epidermalization spreads throughout the body like an odor, like an echoing sound. This feeling differs little from that of sexuality. A sudden dizziness and disorientation, an acute awareness of my outside, of its being for others, a tight swell at my temples. Like Blake in the Human Abstract, Coates emphasizes that the dream, this correlation of objectivity and rationality with whiteness, with a disembodied, privileged experience of disembodied, not having a body, um, is it thrives on generalization. That is to say, a disregard of the particular, um, failure to, again, the dream, good intentions is a hall pass through history, a license not to pay attention to particular details. Um, and Coates calls generalization the enemy of art. Um, so even as this racism creates a new experience of viscerality, a new experience of the body that uh, Charles Johnson describes, a new kind of awareness of vulnerability to violence, and the violence of being seen, even just being seen in this way. Um, Coates also talks about art in the same terms as um, the opposite of generality, teaching us to pay attention to the particular, creating by embodied experience and awareness of the body that is in a way the opposite of that, of the awareness of the body that is created by generalization. So it's a creating of a new body, and that's the other side of Coates's memoir that I want you to think about. Is his emphasis on beauty, on pleasure, on desire, and uh, that as Charles Johnson also did, it underscores a kind of correlation between the violation of racism and the experience of sexuality, a kind of uh, two different experiences of the body are being juxtaposed into two different experiences of embodiment. Um, that I think are it's about a juxtaposition of embodied violence and embodied creativity, or embodied expression, or embodied social relation, um, rather than the violation of all those things, the deprivation of all those things. Um, So think about how the relationship between violence and beauty, pain and pleasure. Um, uh, I think one of the most, in Coates's work, one of the most striking things to me in that it's addressed to his son, um, is his emphasis. Coates emphasizes that he doesn't want to console his son. I'm writing you because you saw Eric Garner killed, um, and this piece of writing is instead of consolation. He says explicitly, I didn't want to console you and tell you everything's okay because it's not okay. So there's a way in which Coates is really emphasizing he does not want to console. He wants his son to recognize and register the reality of this violence. Um, so uh, his text, then, his writing is offering a way of framing that violence, of turning it into a kind of communication. Um, he refers to Amiri Baraka and quotes him. He's a very famous poet and author of a seminal essay on blues music, and I think that's a really crucial way to think about blues music, is turning pain into pleasure by making it communicable. So there's a irony or a paradox about blues music, and then it's talking about pain. Its content, its objective content, seems just to be about pain, but its form is a communication of joy. Um, it's a communication of pleasure. Um, I think that's a helpful way of thinking about what's going on in Coates's text. Um, uh, So again, the crucial thing about metaphor is this musical form, that it takes us out of the temporality of uh, instrumental tool use, using language to control and understand the world, the environment, um, turning it instead into a form of interaction. Um, Communicating emotion, mood, um, uh, blurring of the boundary between self and other, the subject and context, the individual and the environment. Um, so uh, that's what I was talking about in terms of blues music, these kind of paradoxes of, it's a poetic effect, turning pain into pleasure. It's taking us out of an instrumental, merely objective understanding of communication and turning it into a kind of rhythm. Um, now, I think about the way Coates characterizes his communication. He, so much of what he is communicating to his son, this I thou communication, so much of what characterizes it, in contrast to objective I it communication, is a transmission of paradoxes. So he emphasizes, I don't understand my dad's experience, you don't understand my experience, you don't understand your grandfather's experience. In a paradoxical way, like a poem, what's getting communicated is a certain shared experience, paradoxically shared experience of incommunicability, this private experience of pain, turning that private thing into something musically shareable, in common. Um, so that, notice that likewise in the tautologies that Coates refers to. Remember that, Martin Luther King's reference to the time is always right to do right. So it's tautological. Like what is right to the time? You define the right time by doing the right thing, or you define the right thing by its being at the right time. Like it's an implicitly relational, situational definition rather than objective. Um, we define what right being right means by doing right in a particular case, particular uh, situation. Again, the enemy of generality is particularity, caring about the particular rather than waiting on time. Um, that's, I think, what Coates means when he talks about making a people as opposed to being made a race from the outside objectively, subjectively making a people. Um, the people is what the people is what the people does. It is its ability to create itself. Um, the activity through which it creates itself defines what it is. And I think that's inherent in Lincoln's definition of the people, the government um, of the people, by the people, for the people. It's a tautology, recursive definition that only uh, is really manifest in practice, functionally, practically manifested. What it means to be a people, the people for which and of which a democratic democracy is governed is the one that's by the people, the one that it actually does. Um, so again, I'm talking about how objective representation turns into metaphorical representation, something more poetic, more like music. Um, and I think this um, famous duck rabbit illusion is good. It is evocative of what I'm talking about. How it's you can see a rabbit, you can look at it facing one way as a rabbit or the other way as a duck, but you can't see them both at the same time. But you can toggle back and forth. It's that turning what you thought was one thing into an ambiguity, a kind of musical rhythm. Um, that's, I think, what Coates is talking about is the brawl of ancestors. Like that's what makes history alive. Is when it becomes a kind of poetry, a conversation, a dynamic. Interaction that's also a concern for and paying attention to the particulars in particular voices involved. That's what the experience of music is, an attentiveness to the particular performance. Um, okay, so gone on quite a bit. That's what I want to. I hear James Baldwin saying about the experience of reading. You think you're unique. You think your bodily pain is unique, but then you read and you discover that what tormented me was also what connected me. Isn't that this? What he's saying about reading, I think, is also about the true of certainly blues music, but maybe music in general. So, as a final example of metaphor and the kind of rhythmic turning a stable univocal definition that is univocal, unidirectional definition into a musical rhythm interplay of ambiguity, um, of paradox and irony, um, in order to communicate an embodied experience. I want to play through the introduction of Do the Right Thing. Think about the different oppositions that are evoked here. Beginning with this image of Rosie Perez in a boxer's outfit dancing to Fight the Power by Public Enemy, um, evoking fighting, but I also think sexuality and sex, um, kind of the a kind of rhythm of sex itself. Um, that's to say, love and hate. It's a key motif of the movie, um, which I really hope you get a chance to check out. Um, and other oppositions inside and outside. So I already talked about the difference between subjective and objective, the DJ's mouth, the subjective voice, the subjective appeal to waking up versus the mechanical, objective representation of time on the clock. Um, the It's very subtle. I think this introduction is very masterful. Um, there's a juxtaposition of blue and red, hot and cold. Um, but that first shot, going from the close up of the DJ's mouth and then pulling out into the street outside, it's so subtle you might not notice it, but the camera actually goes through the window itself. It seems as if the camera begins inside the window, right next to, intimately close to the DJ's mouth, but then pulls back, and all of a sudden we're outside in the street. Um, and so it's really evoking metaphorically, um, and exploring the opposition between the subjective voice and the objective representation, such as, is broadcast on radio, this sort of voice of transmission, broadcast transmission of social reality. And then we get the picture of a man with a speech impediment referring to objective historical figures, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. This juxtaposition of a struggling body, struggling language, oppressed language, distorted language, and historical facts and historical violence. And the other oppositions, the intimate representations of bodies, of hot, sweaty bodies waking up on a hot summer morning, the intimate proximity of a interior home, domestic space, brother and sister, this intimate family space. And again, the impersonal broadcast authority of the radio in the background, and the impersonality of, once again, money, the wage value, wage compensation. All these factors that we've been talking about are really gorgeously, I think, brilliantly interwoven in a kind of musical way. I had to just capture this with my phone off my screen, so it's a little stilted, but hope you get a sense of it, and I hope you watch the whole thing, get a chance to watch the whole thing.
Wake up! Wake up, wake up, wake up! Up you wake, up you wake, up you wake, up you wake! This is Mr. Senior Love Daddy, your voice of choice. The world's only 12-hour strong man on the air. Here on We Love Radio, 108 FM. The last on your dial, but first in your heart. And that's the truth. Root. Here I am. Am I here? You know it. You know. This is Mr. Senior Love Daddy doing the nasty to your ears to the nasty. Eyes only play the platters that matter, the matters they platter. And that's the truth. Root.
From the heart of Bed-Stuy, you're listening to We Love Radio.
Doing the yin and the yang, the hip and the hop, the stupid fresh thing, the flippity flop. Oh! I have today's forecast for you. Hot! The color for today is black. That's right, black. So you can absorb some of these rays and save that heat for winter. So you want to get on out there, wear that black, and be involved. Also, today's temperature is going to rise up over 100 degrees, so that's a Jerry curl alert. That's right, Jerry curl alert. If you have a Jerry curl, stay in the house, or you'll end up with a permanent plastic helmet on your head forever. All right, we're going to say hello to Mr. and Mrs. and Mr. and Mrs. and happy birthday to Big Red, Little Red, and Miss Annie Mae, who's 100 today. And if you're careful and stay out of the heat, you might live to be that old yourself. There's also a water shortage, so keep those showers down to 1 minute, 2 minutes if you're showering with a friend. You better get on out there and get in this traffic. There's a big traffic jam out here, or you're going to be late for your job and you get that pink slip. So get up, get on out there. That's what I'm talking about. We don't want to see anybody losing their job because nobody got no money to see them when it comes to jobs. All right, now, we're going to talk about it. Drink some of the live. We're going to rock and roll.
Good morning. My name is Smiley. This is Malcolm X. And this is Martin King. Now they're dead. But we still have to fight against the hate.
100, 20, 40, 60, shit. 8, 300, 20, 40, 60, 80. Wait, that's 300, 350, 450, cash dollar bills.
Mookie, where is bothering me when I'm sleeping?
Wake up.
Stop breathing down my neck. Why should I wake up, Mookie?
It's gonna be hot today, Jay.
Saturday's the only day I get to sleep, you lady. Damn. Stop, Mookie. It's not funny. Why don't you leave me alone when I'm sleeping?
What's the matter? You don't love your brother Mookie anymore? I love you, Jay.
Got a lock on my door and keep her outside of here, Mookie. I should go to work, man. Stop, leave me alone for once.
Later. Gotta get paid.
Yeah, brush your teeth, man.
I brush my teeth.
Your breath stinks.